we continue to get consistent rumors time and time again that this treaty could come up. Senator Kerry is apparently very keen on bringing it up, and it seems like every week we hear more confirmation that this could come up again. And this feels a lot like the last time it came up, back in 2007 when I first became acquainted with you, Frank, and Ben, and the center, and Ed as well. And when it was the year before presidential election, there really wasn't much else going on in Senate Foreign Relations, and so they're looking around. They said, what are we going to do with our time? And this, one of our favorite treaties, comes up time and time again, and we call this at Heritage a zombie treaty. You know, you kill it time and time again, but it still rises from the grave every couple of years or so. So the feelings there that this could come up again. Now, luckily, here in 2011 and 2012, the Senate is in a better shape than it was in 2007, and the composition of the Foreign Relations Committee is in better shape than it was in 2007. But as Frank points out, you can never start worrying about this Law of the Sea Treaty too early, because it's such a complex, such a dense treaty that bringing up some of its issues periodically is for the good of us all. And so that's what I'm trying to do here today. And a month ago today, I put out a paper, which I'll get to in a moment. Now, I know most of you are somewhat familiar with this treaty, but for those who aren't, just a very, very brief background, that this treaty usually gets debated on two levels, because there are maritime provisions of the treaty, navigational provisions that deal with being able to have access to different parts of the oceans, and then there are the non-navigational provisions, which are where conservatives traditionally have put all of their eggs. Now, the Navy, it's standard practice that the Law of the Sea Treaty comes up, and then the Navy, who we almost never disagree with at the Heritage Foundation, but they are foursquare in favor of this treaty and always have been. And they swear that they need it in order to guarantee their freedom of access on the high seas, through territorial waters and through international straits and through archipelagic waters. And they'll line up their admirals in every hearing to swear on a stack of Bibles that unless we're a party to this treaty, we can't guarantee our navigational rights around the world for our worldwide missions. Now, I'm not going to go into the rebuttal of that argument right now, but briefly, you know, those navigational rights are guaranteed by customary international law and by the power of our Navy. The real remedy to making sure that these things are always secured is making sure our Navy always has the assets that it needs. But those really are the navigational provisions of the treaty. Those are the good provisions of the treaty. I call those provisions the baby in the proverbial bathwater, because the baby's good, but it is surrounded by this really funky, thick bathwater. And you can't have that baby without also drinking that bathwater. And that's what my paper really is about. It's about one of those bathwater provisions called Article 82. So very briefly, if you have this backgrounder in front of you, if you turn to page 8, there's a map on there. I feel like Professor Groves now. Please turn to page 8 in your report in front of you. So what this provision, Article 82, this bathwater provision, this non-navigational provision, is about what's called the extended continental shelf. Now, the extended continental shelf is our own continental shelf. It's U.S. continental shelf that we are blessed with because the way our country is, and it's our continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. So we're not talking about the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, and we're not talking about the deep seabed, which is some other major problems with the treaty. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about what happens on our own continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. Now, the issue is there are, the estimation by the Extended Continental Shelf Task Force is that there are billions and billions, many billions, if not many trillions of dollars worth of resources out on that extended continental shelf, or ECS. So in oil and natural gas and who knows what else, there could be trillions of dollars worth of resources laying on the U.S. continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. Now, the status quo is that the United States has unfettered access to these resources. We can get to them just the way we get to things in the Gulf of Mexico, for example. And you'll see on the map there are even two small segments of extended continental shelf that are in the Gulf. So right now we have the ability to exploit those assets, use them as we see fit, through our private companies, and the private companies have to pay royalties to the U.S. Treasury for the benefit of the American people. After all, this is our property out there. It doesn't belong to anyone else. And every year, billions of dollars worth of royalties are paid into the U.S. Treasury from oil and gas exploration on the continental shelf. Now, we're not really that active on the ECS just yet, because as you go further out, it gets deeper and deeper. But the status quo is once we start doing that, and we're doing it in a couple places in the Gulf, even today, then all those royalties would be due and owing to the United States Treasury as well. What changes, if we become a party to this treaty, is that we're going to have to start sharing those royalties with what's called the International Seabed Authority, which is this new international organization that is set up by the treaty, and it's headquartered in Kingston, Jamaica. So not a real bad place to work if you can find that work. It's good to have. You can sit down in Kingston, Jamaica, and help redistribute American oil and gas royalties. And that's what Article 82 says. It says if you're a party to the treaty, then any oil and gas exploration that you do on your ECS, beyond 200 nautical miles, you have to start sharing those royalties with us, beginning in year 6 of production. So you got an oil platform out there, it strikes oil. In year 6 of production, you pay a percentage, 1 percentage point to the International Seabed Authority, or what it's really called is they call it the authority, very Orwellian. And it increases 1 percentage point every year until in year 12 of production, you're at 7%. And so from that point on, until the well runs dry, you pay 7% of your royalties to the authority down in Kingston. And that works out to about half the royalties, because right now, oil platforms out in the Gulf and in Alaska pay between 12.5% and 18.75% royalty to the Treasury. So starting in year, year 12 of production, you're paying about half of that amount, or over half that amount, to the authority. So we're talking billions and billions of dollars, maybe over time hundreds of billions of dollars, not going to the United States Treasury, not going to the Gulf states, which is one of the arrangements for royalties for exploration in the Gulf, but instead going to the International Seabed Authority. So it seems to me that we should really have a pretty good idea of how much money we're talking about here before we sign on to the treaty. I mean, at a minimum, there should be some due diligence about how, right now the best estimate we can get is there could be trillions of dollars worth of oil and gas out there. And yet there are people who for many, many years would have us be party to this treaty without finding out actually how much money is sitting out there on our own continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles. So basically some due diligence needs to be done. And we're out there just mapping it now. And so they have to come up with an estimate for the amount of money that's out there before you can even consider joining the treaty, because it's just a giveaway. Half of our royalties from that ECS could be sent down to Kingston. And an interesting question is, where does the money go from there? It's not going to the U.S. Treasury. It's not going to Gulf states. It's not doing, for the benefit of the American people. The authority then redistributes, how do you say redistributes? Redistributes our wealth to the developing world as it sees fit. And these could be developing countries, so-called developing countries around the world. I've never understood the concept of a developing country since they're perennially developing. They will never not be developing. Because even as they're developing, we're developing, then they don't catch up. So they're always going to be developing countries. The other favored nations that this money goes to are landlocked countries. Countries that have no part of their border is on any ocean or body of water, because of course money from our extended continental shelf should be going to develop landlocked countries because they have such a great deal of say over what the law of the sea should be. So it makes perfect sense to me. But it doesn't just stop there, because these monies can go to Cuba, Syria. These are state sponsors of terror. Both those countries are party to the treaty. Or they can just go to undemocratic, despotic regimes. As long as they're a so-called developing country, our U.S. royalty dollars can be distributed to these people. So it doesn't seem to me like a good use of money that should otherwise be going to the United States Treasury. And so, and folks, this is just one of these bathwater provisions. This is just Article 82. There's a second item that Bridget distributed, this one-pager on a fact sheet that's also in your materials. This lays out some of the other bathwater provisions, as much as you can lay out on a one-pager. But suffice to say that Article 82 isn't the only problem with the treaty. It's only one that's really going to be coming to fruition soon, because our technology is really getting to the point where we can go out beyond 200 nautical miles, where we can go out onto the extended continental shelf. We're already doing it to a limited extent in the Gulf. So this is a timely thing. We're way behind in finding out how much money is out on our extended continental shelf, and really a bad idea to even consider the treaty until we know what we'd be giving away to the authority to be redistributed to landlocked countries and developing countries around the world, for what purposes we will not be able to control.